Previously on Unpacked.
I mean, if I walk into a bar dressed in drag, I will either get punched or, I will get the most hateful remarks.
This word was used to break you down as a child.
Their actions do not define who I am and my life.
Today, it is all about the world of drag, divas extraordinaires. I'm so excited for this conversation. Both of our guests will be chatting to us about their experiences and their stories. Let's unpack. In part 2 of our discussion on drag, we are joined by Her Royal Highness Zsa-Zsa Whitney Gabor-Houston, who is a trans activist and former Miss Black Pride and Miss Gay Queen of Queens, who believes that being in drag is not only about getting onto stage, but is also an artistry and a lifestyle. These are their stories. Let's continue to unpack. For this conversation, I did say that we have two guests. Our second guest joins us via video con. Zsa-Zsa, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So you are not in drag currently. So how am I referring to you? Am I speaking to you as Zsa-Zsa or as your birth name?
So Zsa-Zsa is actually my name that I identify with because I'm a transgender woman.
Yes.
And so that is now the official name on my on my ID, according to the Department of Home Affairs, because as a transgender woman, I've started my transitioning process. And so I'm no longer the dead name that was given to me at birth, but I am now the transsexual, the transgender woman that you see now.
And I'm so glad you're explaining that, and I love the fact that your stories are so different. So, Zsa-Zsa, earlier on, I was asking Shenay, how do you identify? And Shenay spoke about her sexuality as Tiart, and I have to be very specific. So we're speaking to Shenay, but we're referring to Tiart. So just to clarify, what are your pronouns so that we can make sure we get it correct? And also, before you were Zsa-Zsa officially, where did the drag fit into that picture for you?
So my pronouns are she, her, hers, as well as Her Royal Highness.
Ooh.
Because so when I'm in drag, I actually go by the full name Her Royal Highness Dame Zsa-Zsa Whitney Gabor-Houston. And that's when I'm on stage. That is my alter ego or my persona. And so every day-to-day life for me is about Zsa-Zsa Ariel Fischer. And that is my names according to the Department of Home Affairs. But prior to that, I was assigned male at birth, and the names given to me was William Ramon Andrew Fischer.
And how did you choose the name Zsa-Zsa?
So I don't know if you know the socialite Hungarian-American Zsa-Zsa Gabor.
Is that from the reality show?
Yeah, so Zsa-Zsa Gabor, she lived to 99.
Yes, I remember now.
Yes, so Zsa-Zsa Gabor was a socialite, she and her two sisters, and they basically made a name for themselves in the US. And so I've always idolized her, and I always found that when I was in drag, our persona, her life and my character was very similar. And I really love the name because the one thing I found for myself is that when I started my transitioning process, or at least actually it started off with drag, because drag actually allowed me to find my true calling, or about my true self and my true being as a transgender woman. But when I was looking for a name, I always said that, a lot of people who transition try to keep with the letters of the dead names that they were given. And so a lot of people say to me, well, your name was William, so why don't you make it Wilhelmina? And you could be Wilhelmina Slater or something like that. But I wanted a complete cut from the dead names. And so I went to the last letter of the alphabet and I just said, you know what, I love Zsa-Zsa Gabor. And so Zsa-Zsa will be my preferred name as well as on stage. And so obviously because Whitney Houston has always been an idol of mine, hence I've added in the Whitney Houston part into my drag performance name.
Thank you so much for actually sharing the part of, your transgender journey, because we did have that episode previously on the show, and there's just so many subjects to cover. And even though today we're speaking specifically about drag, it's important because it does form such a big part of your story. So take us back to your beginning of your drag journey, and at what point did it start to intertwine with your trans journey?
So, without giving away my age,
because you never ask a girl her age.
You never do. You never do. Let's just leave it at 23. And so, I've always been in the performing arts. I come from a performing arts background as well. But I knew I was different. I just didn't know how well I fitted into this normative that was society. But I think I was like 7 years old when I realized that I was sexually attracted to the same sex back then. But I didn't know how to express myself because I'd never been around people who had the same feelings. I'd never been exposed to this kind of lifestyle, and also coming from a very religious background, single parent upbringing. So it was always just about church and the Bible and sin, sin, sin. So obviously that fear was also instilled into you in terms of not being able to do certain things outside of what the norm is according to society. But for me, it was just one of those things that I felt different. I knew I was different. And obviously back then I didn't know about transgenderism, but I knew that, okay, the closest thing that I had been made aware of or, given knowledge on was the fact that there was lesbian and gay.
And that's so critical, because so many people that are watching can probably reflect on the fact that the only thing they know about the LGBTIQ plus A community is gay and lesbian. They don't know
Absolutely.
or understand anything else.
Even in the transgender community, we've always been, or at least we still get categorized as gay, simply because of the lack of knowledge and understanding of the LGBTQIA acronym and its true meaning and what it stands for. So that is where a lot of knowledge is still required, in society for us. But with that, from the age of 7 years old, I found myself getting into my mom's clothes. I still used to fit into her heels back then. So I would get into her clothes, into her heels, and I would actually start performing out little skits for my siblings just to entertain them and, made them laugh. And eventually that went to later me imitating people that I used to hang around with. I used to imitate teachers, my grandmother. I used to imitate the church people and how they would always praise and worship in the church, and especially the elderly people and how they, carry on in the church and are so somber. And so that's where I found all of this, giving me some sort of strength and support. But as William, this person who was still identified as gay till later on in my life, I was still an introvert. And that was because of stigma and discrimination growing up. Growing up in a Black community, was a colored community where I grew up in Durban. There's that fear that it gets instilled. And obviously, I was very effeminate. Even my walk is very feminine. So, there's just some things that you cannot hide. And so because of that, I was always stigmatized, discriminated against. But I found a way out of how best I could come into contact with the true me. When I was in standard 7, the now grade 9, is when I found this loophole basically for me, when I decided that I needed to be free, I needed to be me. And though I could only be free and me at school and outside of the home, it still allowed me that little bit of freedom. Though I still identified as gay, but that opened lots of doors for me in terms of my freedom. Then I continued doing performing arts out of matric when I went to a dance school in Durban North, and I did dance, drama, music. So with that also gave me, it allowed me to be slightly more of an extrovert, but still very shy and still being William. It still gave me that fear of, how do I come out? How do I tell people how I feel? And, growing up, I still realized that you keep saying that you're gay, but you don't feel like you are completely gay, because it just didn't make sense to me, because I did not identify as a boy or as a man.
Can I ask you something? You say that you were saying that you are gay. Was the feeling that, yes, I've called myself this, but there's still something missing?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And that's always been, it's like, you, in your heart and in your mind, you feel that society only knows lesbian and gay, but internally, in my heart and in my mind, I felt that I do not fit into this category of gay, because I do not see myself as a man who is sexually attracted to another man. I see myself as a woman. I feel like a woman. And so that is when I had this internal struggle and this internal fight emotionally with myself, because how do I speak to my family and express to them how I feel? Because I myself still was struggling with that. And, I always say that stigma and discrimination happens internally as well, because you become so hateful towards yourself because of what society has done to you as an individual, because of this societal or heteronormative lifestyle that you're supposed to live as a boy and become a man and, be a family man and patriarchy and support your family. But none of that stuck with me, and none of that really gave me a hope, except when I came to Johannesburg in 2005 and I found this newfound, I don't want to say freedom, it was more of a new journey, and it opened my eyes to everything around me.
So, Zsa-Zsa, let's pick up then on, you saying how your drag journey sort of intertwined with your journey of finding yourself and your trans journey. Now you were saying, getting to the part of your drag journey and how you actually formally got into it.
It was the night before Pride in Johannesburg, and a group of friends decided that we need to have a pre-Pride party. And so we decided we were going to go over to a friend's home and just have braai and chill and a few drinks. And thereafter, I said to them, okay, you know what? Maybe I should do a drag performance. Come in drag and just perform for you guys. And they were like, yeah, that would be so nice to have some lovely entertainment. And so with that, we had this performance at the pre-Pride party of my friend's home, and one of them just decided we have to go to this gay club in downtown Johannesburg. And On that very same night is when they were actually hosting the Miss Black Pride pageant. And so they were like, oh no, Zsa-Zsa, you have to enter. And so I was like, no, I don't do these things. I only do it for entertainment and for my passion and eventually I entered, and I think I was second runner up for that pageant in that year. And that's when it all started. That's where this journey opened up more, and the excitement and the adrenaline, because I found my freedom and I found who I am, though I still identified as gay. But the next years, in 2010, I then decided to enter Miss Black Pride again. And that's when I won Miss Black Pride 2010. And one of the requirements as a pageant queen was that you needed to do drag performances as well at the club. And so I was very nervous at first, but with the performing arts background that I had, I'm a very meticulous person. And I always felt that, you know what, if you're going to do something, you've got to be a perfectionist about it, especially with drag. And when I met these other drag queens at this club, like Madame La Rochelle and Brooke Logan, these women were fierce and phenomenal. And that just instills a fear as to how best do you beat them? How best do you actually get or come to their level of their performances? But for me, I'd always believed that I'm an individual and I will always stick out like a sore thumb because that's who I believe I am. And I want to leave a mark as Zsa-Zsa. And knowing that it's when I decided that their drag was more of a drag queen artistry, and where I became a drag performer because my makeup was more subtle. It wasn't as exaggerated as the norm as RuPaul Drag Race. And with that, I also still kept the femininity of who I was as William at that time, and so as I performed and continued doing drag, I then came to realize that I was so much more comfortable in female clothes and in dresses and in heels. And that's when I did more research and I started working with health institutes in terms of what they do. And that's when I found out about transgenderism. And that's when my heart leapt for joy because I finally found where I belonged, And so that is how Zsa-Zsa became Zsa-Zsa. Because I still love the name. I still wanted to keep it. I just have a different stage name as an alter ego. But Zsa-Zsa is who I am, and drag will always be part of me as Zsa-Zsa Ariel Fischer and as Her Royal Highness Dame Zsa-Zsa Whitney Houston, because she's allowed me to be this confident individual that I never was. And as our guest Shenay also mentioned, that satirical part of when you are on stage, of saying things that you could never say as, when you're off stage, is where it boosts my confidence. And so I've become this transgender activist and human rights activist because of drag, because it's allowed me that freedom of expression, and it now has become part of my day-to-day life.
I want to, and thank you for sharing that, I want to jump into the politics of drag. Is the term, and this is to the both of you, I'll start with you, Shenay, is the term cross-dressing derogatory?
I think in the older society or in the older mindset, we refer to people as cross-dressers or cross-dressing.
Yes.
But that for me, in my personal stance, refers to someone who does that not as a character,
yes,
who does that as themselves, who feel like they want to wear female clothing, whether they're a man.
Yes.
They feel like they want to wear, female attire.
Yes.
So I don't get offended if people refer to me as a cross-dresser. I do always correct them and say them that, the correct term would be a drag artist or a drag queen.
Yes.
But again, I feel like we're forever evolving and we're always educating society. We can't jump on our horse and, become defensive about these things because people don't know.
Yes.
So we need to take it in our stride to educate and help society along as best we can.
And I think you said it very well by saying it's usually somebody just doing it for their own personal reasons. It's not public because people can do it for sexual reasons, can do it for, they just feel good doing it at home.
It's a confidence booster for them. We never know what somebody else, what their intention is because they do it.
Yes.
It's their own prerogative. Like it's their own little utopia, if you can put it that way. And we need to respect that.
Zsa-Zsa, from your side, what are your thoughts on the term cross-dresser?
So cross-dressing is actually one of the umbrella terms underneath the transgender umbrella, basically. So I'm also a facilitator. Yes. So I do a lot of training on stigma and discrimination, on the LGBTI and sexual orientation, gender identity, expressions, and sexual characteristics. And if we look at the transgender umbrella, the term cross-dressing actually falls within that umbrella. Cross-dresser, transgender, transsexual, transvestite, drag king, drag queen. So there's many other terms that fall within the umbrella of transgenderism. So it's not really a derogatory term.
Oh, yes, I got you. And I actually was not even aware of that. Like, with you explaining it now that it forms part of the umbrella, whereas I probably got familiar with a cross-dresser, just somebody doing it for themselves, before I got familiar with drag artists. So it's easy to confuse the two. But now you're saying it's under the umbrella. I'm like, okay, now it actually opens it up a bit more. From your side, do you feel like drag, or even to include cross-dressing, should be included in the community of the LGBTIQ+? And I ask this because many of the drag artists I've met who are men dressing as women with their characters, very few were straight men.
Drag is not bound to a gender.
Yes.
Like anybody can do it.
Or a sexuality.
Yes. Like it's really open to anyone. The majority is obviously people of queer identity or identification, if you can put it that way, who do these type of things. But there are people from hetero society who do practice, being a drag queen or a drag king, who do put on a pair of stockings and heels, for their partner when they're at home type things. It's not, I don't want to bind it to, being a queer art.
Yes.
It's open to anybody.
Zsa-Zsa, from your side, especially because this is part of the work that you do, what kind of discriminations do you see in the community where there's almost a gray area because a person doesn't have to say what their sexuality is, but by virtue of the fact that now they are in drag, they can be included in the community? What are those discriminations and maybe politics that come about, especially when it comes to drag artists or those who choose to cross-dress?
Oh, wow. So
big question.
That's a very sensitive, sensitive and very big because, it's as Shenay mentioned, in the beginning, is like the derogatory term that they use in Afrikaans as morphie, and also being a person of color and going to gay clubs where there are majority Black people, you'd always come across the derogatory African term that was, stabani, that would be used on us. I've had that face-to-face, and personal experience of being stigmatized and discriminated. And strangely, majority of stigma also comes from within the LGBTQI community. because there is this masculinism versus feminism within the LGBTQI. And so we are frowned upon as men who want to dress up as women, number one, and wanting to be feminine. And why do you want to dress up? And so these are the kinds of questions that always get asked, but not from a point of wanting the knowledge or wanting to understand us as drag artists and performers, but more from that point of a patriarchal, way of saying, you're a man, be a man. And that's basically what they're saying indirectly. So it's harsh, and it's been very harsh, and we've learned as drag artists and performers to actually just stick it out, because we know that this is passion, and we know what drives us to do it.
I love you bringing up the masculinity versus femininity. I was having a conversation with Tolang and Siogezi, and the conversations were around their transgender journeys. And I brought up the fact that there's pretty privilege. It's easy when you are beautiful for people to be more accepting of you. So, for example, if your drag appearance was less palatable to what society says is okay. Like, I think many people accept RuPaul because she is beautiful. Whereas if you don't have the resources to have the gorgeous wigs and all those things, then you might not look as palatable as society can accept you. What are your thoughts on that and the pretty privilege and the masculinity versus the femininity in the space?
So pretty privilege, I do get, that a lot of people don't necessarily have the resources that other people have, especially in, I don't want to say poorer communities or smaller communities.
Yes.
Let me rather say that as opposed to us queens who are in the city, who have all these resources. But I also want to touch on the femininity and the masculinity thing. This is my character. So whenever I'm in my character, obviously I do more feminine gestures.
Yes.
When I'm out of it, yes, there's still an extent to femininity there, but I don't consider myself masculine.
Yes.
I don't want to conform to, what society has, I don't want to say brainwashed us to what it is to be a man. Like, I am just out there living my life the best way that I can and as authentically as I can. But with the pretty privilege, it's like, why we shouldn't judge people on, on what they have.
Yes.
Like, people are making the best with what they got.
Yes.
Yes. And it is a process of evolution and growing. And we need to support them like when they're not their best.
Yes.
And by being there, a support structure and uplifting these other, drag artists or whoever it is, that want to pursue the art of drag, we all started somewhere. If I have to look back where I was 12 years ago, more or less the same way I'm now. No, I'm joking.
I love that you I made a rand.
There's been progress. But I mean, I will never forget where I come from.
Yeah.
And for me, it's a steady foundation, a steady building going forward. And we need to support each other.
Yeah. And I'm with you completely that we can't judge on prettiness because that goes across the board.
It fades.
Not just that, I'm aware of the concept of pretty privilege. There's certain things that might not have happened to me if I didn't look a certain way, be it, skin tone, be it my face. There's certain opportunities that might have been a lot harder for me to get because of that. So that does apply in the hetero space, but also in this space.
But also with this whole prettiness, we should hold society accountable. Because what is pretty?
Yeah.
What is pretty? We've been showcasing in magazines and on billboards and television and all these things, like what it is to be the ideal person.
Yeah.
Like, what is the perfect person?
Yeah.
What is that? Nobody really knows. We can only go on what society has shown us.
Yeah.
But we need to, pretty is different for everybody.
Yeah.
And we need to expect and respect that. Accept and respect that.
I got you. Zsa-Zsa, from your perspective, what has your journey taught you so far? Yours has been quite a layered one because you went from identifying as a gay man to being transgender, to starting the transition, to the point that you've even changed your ID, something that many South Africans don't even know you are able to do. What have you learned up until this point, particularly about what society feels about the community as a whole?
is where my activism basically comes out, and I'm so passionate about it because, the society frowns upon these things. And the sad reality is that our policymakers and our government doesn't give us the constitutional freedom that we all have as South Africans, because though our constitution is so beautifully written, we as transgender people face so many challenges within the departments. And so, I've just come to realize that we still have a very far way to get to the point of freedom for our LGBTQIA plus community, especially with the hate crimes that have happened in the past 3 months, where we've literally lost 9 people, and so this is the sad reality of what we live through on a daily basis as LGBTQI community. And as activists, we find the stories, every day coming through our WhatsApps about people that have lost their lives to hate crimes. So we have a far way to go in terms of acceptance and respecting the LGBTQI community. And I believe that there needs to be so much more education and exposure about the LGBTQI community and what we are and whom we truly are, because only then will people truly understand us, accept us, and respect us, because we are not here to change anybody's lives. We just want to live our lives. And more especially within the transgender community, you'll find that so many transgender people live isolated lives, and don't go out of the areas that they live in because of this fear of stigma and discrimination. And especially in our rural areas is where our Black people are suffering the most because of this lack of education and understanding of transgenderism. So for me, there's still a long journey that we have to reach. And we always say that a luta continua, the struggle continues, but we will definitely get there one day.
I really hope that these conversations normalize, destigmatize. It won't be a big deal anymore that we're on television speaking transgender. We won't have to keep explaining certain definitions, or we won't have to, have that hetero view on life. It will be normalized. From your side, Shenay, we've already spoken about the fact that you've got your marginalized communities, which are poorer Black communities, facing the issues related to culture, religion, and in particular to do with your sexuality. Where do you see there's still a way to go as a gay man living in South Africa?
Well, as you mentioned, all of the above.
Yeah.
But especially coming from an Afrikaans background, we are constantly being bombarded with religion, being bashed with religion, constantly being told that what we're doing is a sin, the way that we're living our lives is a sin. And then at the end of the sermon, give us your money because we need it.
Yes.
So we need to get to a place where, because the Bible also preaches, it says love each other, or
love your neighbor.
Love your neighbor as you love yourself type thing. But there's still so much discrimination and hatred within the church and in religion that they're not practicing what they're preaching.
Yes.
And I think we still have a very, very long way to go in that. Within the community, acceptance and respect.
Yes.
I think there's still a big divide within the community, especially accepting different gender identities and sexualities and allowing people to be and express who they are freely.
Yeah.
Because how can we expect a heteronormative society to accept us and embrace us if we can't even do that within our own community?
Yeah.
So I think, charity starts at home, and we need to look, to ourselves to make sure that we take on the responsibility on ourselves to create and see the world that we want to see in the future.
Yeah.
And also at the end of the day, when you go home, you're the only person in the mirror. You need to be happy with what you see in the mirror. There's no one else that can do that for you.
Yeah.
So you need to be content with what you see in the mirror and be happy that knowing that you are making an effort in creating the future for future generations.
Zsa-Zsa, in closing, on the concept of drag, do you still think we've got a long way to go? And what do you have to say to the viewers watching at home?
So in terms of drag, we have, I think, an extremely far way to go, solely also because I don't believe that we have been accepted as drag artists, number one, and also there hasn't been enough scope or exposure or platforms for drag artists. And with COVID around, it's also minimized our performances and where to go. But just in general, we are losing a lot of drag artists because of stigma and discrimination. So we need to perhaps get the performing arts or the arts and culture departments to strengthen the drag industry within our country, but more especially in Gauteng, because, Gauteng had such a diverse drag artistry across the province, and to think that it's fizzled down to just one or two gay clubs in the whole of Gauteng. And then it's also the battle of going into these clubs and being able to be yourself or go in as drag and not be stigmatized and discriminated. So I believe that, there's a long way to go, but given the exposure and the platforms to gain that and give that knowledge, I believe that we can get drag back to where it used to be in the 70s and 80s in our country.
And it's a pity that we've run out of time because we didn't even touch on the surface of the pageantry space. So for those watching at home, there is a whole world, in the drag space. It's not just performing in gay clubs and singing and dancing. There is a pageantry space of which you, Zsa-Zsa, are a title holder. Three-time title holder. There you go. We'll put the details up on the screen that you can find. Thank you so much, Shenay, for joining our conversation. I would have loved for us to continue because I also feel like I need to come for lessons. There's so much we can learn just in terms of creatives, in terms of my artistry, from the type of work that you do. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for creating this platform of educating and putting our stories out there.
Thank you. Zsa-Zsa, thank you so much. I'm so sad you couldn't be with us in studio today, but I'm so glad you're able to join us via VideoCon.
Yes, it's only a pleasure, and thank you for the platform and for exposing drag artistry in our country.
I hope that those of you watching at home get to join in on the conversations, hashtag Unpacked with Relebogile. And of course, our social details are there. Engage with us, full extended version up online on YouTube as soon as we get off air. I'm so excited about these kinds of conversations because I literally walk out having learned something new each and every time. And we continue to grow as a society, as individuals. So yeah, all about drag. Like I said, we didn't get to touch all of the topics. We will provide you with some of the resources so that you can get educated. More importantly, if you feel like, hey, this is something I want to do, you can find those contacts, and also make sure you follow and get in touch with our guests. Have a fantastic evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Next time on Unpacked.
Some of the sex workers are being raped by the police officers inside the cells.
A sex worker being raped,
yes,
and she just cannot even trust in a system to protect her.
Why can't we just arrest everyone, even our grannies that we're supporting, even the kids? Go and take my child at school and go and arrest the child. We're crying for our fellow sex workers that passed on.
Unpacked with Relebogile Mabotja. New episodes weekdays at 5:30 p.m. on my YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe. Television edited broadcasts weekdays at 5 p.m. Open up to S3.